And welcome to the first podcast of 2026. I have to make myself deliberately remember that's what the date is.
It's only 3 days old. You have some time to
3
get used
days
to
old,
it.
that's right. And as well to our new reading and to our new theme for 2026, Jehovah is King. If you're looking at the reading schedule, you notice that the assignment this week is to read the book of Joshua. Joshua, Judges, and Ruth are all relatively short books. And so one of the things that Jeff and I would really like for you guys to do is to take the time to listen to the whole book or to read the whole book in one sitting, as opposed to just reading it chapter by chapter. That's something that has been a recent Bible study thing for me. I don't know that over the years of my preaching that I've really given a lot of attention to just starting in chapter 1 and reading all the way through and kind of ignoring the chapter and verse divisions, which I know delights you. but have really found a great value in making myself read that way. It takes a larger investment of time.
Yep. And brain power. I mean, you actually have to focus more while you're reading.
Yeah, and probably not as much time as we're investing in social media every day. So I think it's a worthwhile sacrifice to take some of that time and invest it in sitting down and having the discipline to go all the way through. The books are just different when you read them as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, you get a sense of the whole. You notice connections that you might not otherwise connect. Because these are not just inspired books; they're well written books. And so sometimes connections, themes, certain events happen in certain places, certain place names keep popping up in the book like Josh, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talk about connections. I don't think you can perceive questions or connections rather when you study books as we typically do. Chapter 1, verse 1.
It's a lot harder certainly to do that.
What does it mean?
Yeah, it means
Chapter
what it
1,
says,
verse
what
2.
it means.
Yeah, what does it say? And here's a difficult place I don't know. When we kind of, and I'm not saying there isn't value in that kind of study. I'm just saying when I'm closely examining every word in every verse and kind of walking through the book that way, it tends to end up chopped up.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so those, for example, a phrase that is repeated over and over again winds up getting missed because I'm not reading it over and over again, right? I'm reading it afresh every time I come back to work a new segment.
No, that's exactly right. And then we forget, to be a serious reader, and very intentional about our reading, it's not either or, it's both and, to your point. In other words, there is a place for close, detailed, but slow reading. There's also a place for the broad overview in that, the broad overview sometimes gives me context to make sense of the individual pieces I'm reading. I'll have a better framework to put them into, understand individual stories and how they all fit together. At the same time, sometimes there's details in specific stories. Certain stories or certain passages carry more weight than others, and so they become kind of interpretive keys to the larger context. And so the reality is you don't need either or, you need both and you need to go back and forth. There's a time, but I think, to kind of echo what you're saying, for a lot of us historically, we've tended to be more narrow, close readers than big picture readers. And let's be honest, some of it's just because of time, because it's one thing to do my daily Bible reading, which is 15 minutes and one chapter, as opposed to I need to sit down for 2 hours and read a whole book.
Yeah. And even if, that's a challenge for me, one of the things I would suggest is listening to it.
Audiobook, yeah, audio Bible.
You can go back. There are free apps you can get on your phone that will read the Bible. I don't think it's the most effective way to do that, but it is a way to do that. And I really do think it makes a difference. I think you're correct in pointing out that it's that both pieces are needed. I just think it's that second one that is missed. But
Agreed.
Then we go back and we don't always understand things correctly because we don't have that bigger sense of what the book is all about and what he's trying to do.
No, that's right.
So we're opening with Joshua. It will be useful, I think, to place Joshua in its biblical context, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we kind of have to pick up the history with Joshua because Joshua kind of sort of fits together with Exodus and Numbers, right?
Yeah. This is the payoff moment, right? This is from God's promise, the whole Pentateuch, from God's promise to Abraham
But one of the challenges of the history books, or the law books at the beginning, rather, is the history portions of them are kind of also mixed in with the law.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of easy to lose track of where we are
Right.
in the story. And so we've exited Egypt, and they've wandered for 40 years because of their sin. And now we're back at the Jordan, and
Right.
we're ready. They're ready to go up and conquer the promised land. And that is really, that is the story of this book. It's
Yeah.
the details of how the land is conquered and settled.
No, that's exactly right. And of course, part of the fun even starts with the very name of the book and the main figure in the book, Joshua. Whose name in Hebrew comes from a root for salvation. And of course, many of us already know that Jesus' name, Jesus is just kind of the Greek way of saying Joshua. So that, in a sense, Jesus' name, Jesus is the greater Joshua, the one who really gave salvation in terms of eternal rest in God's presence as the people of God. And so, and that's what the Hebrew will talk about Joshua, in the sense, Hebrews chapter 4, Joshua didn't really give rest. The greater rest is found in Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that, just literally starting right there with why does this book matter? Rightly and carefully read, it's a way of entering into thinking about what God wants to do for us, for his people in an eternal sense, not just with a piece of real estate on the far side of the world.
And while I wouldn't want to press that too far, you do kind of have a heaven kind of sense about Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
It's also pressing on, for Israel, in their case, to the reward,
That's
which
the point.
is the promised land.
That's the point. The people of God come in to inherit, every man under his vine and fig tree. God is your protector. Peace, prosperity, shalom in the fullest sense. And Joshua, salvation, is the one who leads them into that rest. That's meant to be a shadow, a type of, what God intends for his people to have. That's why the Hebrew writer plays off that in Hebrews 4.
So if you're reading through the book for the first time as
Mm-hmm.
part of this reading through the whole thing, what are you watching for? What are some of the connecting threads that are going to pull through the whole book? What do you think?
Yeah, well, in one sense, I mean, this is, there's a better way to structure the book, but I think just for the first read this week, you're really going to feel like you hit two parts. You're going to hit the familiar stories in the first 12 chapters or so.
Conquest stories.
Most of them fairly familiar. Maybe a couple that you'd forgotten about, hadn't read in a while, and maybe one or two that are even new, some of the smaller ones. But yeah, great stories from Jericho to the day the sun stood still. I mean, just great stories. And familiar. But starting about chapter 13 or so, it's going to get kind of Leviticus-like. In that, chapter 13 and for a number of chapters following, you then have, once they're through kind of conquering and occupying the land, the allotment of the land. And there's going to be a temptation to fast forward, skip over, get back to the end when Joshua gives those rousing speeches about me and my house will serve the Lord,
Yeah, like 15 and verse 21, where you start the list.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot of that. But here's why I think, especially this week in our initial read through, why you should at least stay in the trenches and go through that. It may seem boring to us, but remember, every word is inspired. Not trying to guilt you too much, but every word is inspired. It doesn't matter. Part of our job as reading the Bible is let the Bible discipline our minds to what God thinks is important, rather than thinking what we think is important. Why would these chapters that seem pedantic and irrelevant to us now, because I don't get a piece of real estate over there, so what does that have to do with me? Here's why it matters. It's a way of building faith today, which is this. Those seemingly pedantic chapters work on two levels. Number one, it's illustrating the thoroughness by which God has kept his word and the land that he promised to Abraham is possessed. Not just God saying in the big picture, close enough. By going in such excruciating detail through, God has kept his word to Abraham that this land has been given, that your descendants have inherited the land I gave you. Secondly, as you're going through tribes and then clans within tribes and the families within the tribes, and again, it seems really pedantic, and I'm not one of those families, so what does it matter to me? Everybody's name really is in God's book. You're never so small. You're never so insignificant. That's the whole point. We think
I
these
love
people.
that part.
Yeah, we want to write these people off as insignificant. I don't know this name. I'll never see this name in the Bible. This name may never appear again in the Bible. It may be absolutely irrelevant to the story of how Jesus comes and we are saved, in a sense, going forward. But the point is, even though relative to the main thrust of God's work in history, that name may have no further point to play. The point is, the names were known to God, and he kept his word to every last one of them. They got a piece of the land. They got a piece of the rest of God's blessing. And again, that's an act of faith. You don't want to be forgotten, so don't want God forgetting you. Don't forget the people God remembered in this book. Read every name. Take the time in this one to do that as we're reading through this book as a means of spiritual uplifting. Your name matters to God too. And so I think there's the scope of God's keeping His promises, His faithfulness against all odds, centuries in the making. We waited for 2,000 years for Jesus to come back.
Right.
It took centuries to get to this point, but the point is when it came, everything God promised was doled out. And everybody who had a right to it was not, was remembered. Everybody, the names mattered to God. They don't matter to you and me. Take time to build your faith by reading those names.
Another thought that occurred to me, and I'm not going to say this in absolute because that wouldn't be accurate, but one of the contrasts between Joshua and Judges is that in Joshua, the people are following the king.
Yes.
That's why they're going in this time.
Yes.
Remember, they tried to go up 4 years before, and they didn't follow the king. They didn't listen to him and trust him.
That's right.
And this time, while there are exceptions, AI comes to mind, or I, as you said it.
Well, close enough.
Okay. AI for the rest of us. Largely, they do what God wants them to do, at least initially, because they are walking with the king. And I think the first two books we will read this year really serve as a powerful contrast because in the second book, they're largely not going to do.
Right, that generation passes away.
Yes.
Joshua and the elders pass away, and you have people who do not, they'll remember what God had done, hadn't seen it with their own eyes, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's pretty impressive to notice how things go when we listen to God and do what He says.
Right.
And how they go when we don't do that, right? And so the broader theme we're working this year, I think we're kind of slowly laying out this big idea in the book of Joshua. In fact, he's going to get to that point in the end. He's going to ask, who are you going to serve?
Right.
What's your choice?
Right.
And I think that's the choice of every man. It's the choice ultimately we have to make as well. Is God going to be our king? Are we going to serve Him? And the thing to watch for as you read through Joshua is how well it works out when they follow His instructions and do what He says.
Right.
So this week, reading through Joshua. If you got younger kids, maybe just a portion of that to begin with. But for the rest of us, let's try to read through the whole book this week.